Sometimes bad men can teach us good lessons. I'm Kerry Decker, and I'm a pastor and also a Christian. And I wanted to introduce you to some bad men, some really bad men here in today's broadcast. This is all part of the series that I am developing about why I am a Christian. And I wanted to share some of the reasons why I believe in God. And we're going to be talking about that today. So we'll be right back. Okay, we're talking about some bad men who taught us some good lessons. And here we have a lineup of some of the most notorious serial killers that America has known. And you might recognize them coming up at the top left. We have Ted Bundy. Then we have the son of Sam. Can't remember David Berkowitz was his name. Then we have Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez. I think on the bottom left is that we have John Wayne Gacy. And then the BTK killer, and I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. And then also a couple others that their names escape me. And that I do recall, I watched a dramatized documentary about the hunt for some of these serial killers. And I do recall this second to the last guy showing up in that, but I cannot remember his name right now. So what we want to do is focus in today on Jeffrey Dahmer. And because, like I said, sometimes bad men can teach us a good lesson. And Jeffrey Dahmer did an interview many years ago with a television personality by the name of Stone Phillips. Maybe some of you remember him. And here's a quick snippet, a quick clip from that interview. But before we do that, I just want to take a look at some of the young men that Dahmer killed. And of course, many of you remember that he not only murdered these men, but also did hideous experiments on some of them and even cannibalized some. And so, but let's watch that clip from his interview with Stone Phillips.
If a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway.
That's a good lesson that Dahmer teaches. He says that if a person doesn't think that there's a God to be accountable to, then why modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? And certainly he was far from being within acceptable ranges. And this whole issue of morality is what we want to focus on today, and how that morality points to God's existence. And these are some slides that I created. I volunteer for an organization called Reasonable Faith. And I think that it'd be good if you had a chance to check them out on the web at reasonablefaith.org. And plenty of great resources and plenty of great answers to the questions that you might have about God and faith, the Bible, Christianity. And I shared these slides with a group of volunteers for that organization, and how that morality points to God's existence. Can people be good without believing in God? Well, I think that the simple answer to that is yes. people don't have to believe in God in order to be good. As a matter of fact, sometimes people who don't believe in God behave better than people who do. And so we really don't need to have belief in God in order to do good. That's not the point that I'm making here in this talk when I'm talking about why I am a Christian. And one of the reasons why I'm a Christian is the whole idea of the moral foundation that we find within belief in God. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just go on with the next slide. But do we have a basis for good without God? Or do we have a true foundation for good without God? And I think that the answer to that question is no. So let's think about why that's the case. And if God does not exist, then objective, and that's the key word there, objective moral values and duties do not exist. I mean, after all, who are you going to be accountable to if God does not exist? Is that, and that if you want to just live your life outside of the constraints of morality, like Dahmer did, well, then, that the only ones that are going to stop you is society. But not all societies, as we'll see, are good societies. I think that's pretty evident from our not too distant past. So let's just go ahead and move forward with this. So let's try this thought experiment. Let's take God out of the picture for a moment. What might be the basis of moral values and duties? And so here again, I'm not talking about can people have moral values and duties apart from God, but I'm really talking about the foundation for that. And so once we take God out of the picture, it's pretty easy for us to see that morality is not based on the individual. I mean, after all, Mother Teresa is a good example of a good person, and some people feel compelled to serve others. That's just their nature. But other people, like Jeffrey Dahmer, feel compelled to eat others. And so it's pretty evident to me, at least, that morality is not based on the individual. And serial killers are a good example of that. Well, then, how about society? Is morality based on society? And I think that it's pretty evident, again, if we would just do a little bit of reflection, that morality is not based on society. I mean, after all, had Adolf Hitler won World War II, it would still be wrong to gas Jews as he did. Now, the Allies, that they were right in trying the Nazis, that we held them to account for the war crimes that they committed. And the Allies were right in doing that. It wasn't because that we had the power now over them. It's not because we won the war, but it's because there's an objective standard of right and wrong that's above every society. Let me just repeat that. There's an objective standard of right and wrong that's above every society, and so morality is not based on societies. I mean, after all, think about it. If morality was based on society, and within a society that the majority of the people believed that racism was okay, then how in the world could we ever have a reformer who is calling that society to a higher standard like we did with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? So it just takes one person who understands the higher morality than the social morality, and that one person can call an entire society to change. So morality is not based on the individual. Morality is not based on society. But morality is also not based on science. And, there's a lot of popular thinkers have a great kind of overblow the importance of science when it comes to making important decisions about life. And while science can tell us how to build the bomb, it does not tell us whether or not, science does not tell us whether or not we should use it. That decision is a political decision that's hopefully determined by moral principles and moral philosophy that is higher than the society itself. Morality, obviously, is not based on evolution. You take God out of the picture, and what are you left with? Is that you're left with just a world that operates according to particular natural principles. And the popular atheist Richard Dawkins understands this. He wrote in one of his books, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties that we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." So Dawkins says this: when you look around the world, he says, and this, by the way, is a philosophical statement, it's not a scientific statement, but Dawkins says this, is that the world possesses the properties that we would expect, that if there is no design, at bottom there's no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. He says that's really what's at the very basis of the natural world. But also another popular atheist, Sam Harris, he argues for a particular platitude as the foundation of morality. But it's pretty evident that that's not the case either, because morality is not based on some platitude. The science of morality, Sam Harris says, the science of morality is about maximizing psychological and social health. And his idea is that morality needs to be based on human flourishing. But with a little bit of thought and reflection, we can see why that this is a insufficient basis to ground morality. In other words, who gets to decide? Harris thinks that his platitude is the right one to adopt, but then who gets to say what contributes to human flourishing? Who says what course promotes our best welfare? Even Hitler, if you stop and think about it, he did what he did because he thought, and I think that he truly believed that what he was doing was best for society. And so you understand, you see what I'm saying here is that that if we adopt platitudes, some platitude as the foundation of morality, we're just back to the whole problem of who gets to decide what platitudes count. Now, we do, however, know this truth. Objective moral values and duties do exist. I like what C.S. Lewis said about this. He says, whenever you find a man who says he doesn't believe in a real right and wrong, you will find that same man going back on this a moment later. He will break his promise to you. But if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining, it's not fair. And so deep within us, we all have this sense, this moral principle, this moral sense that of right and wrong, and that it's pretty objective, even though that there are certain superficial differences between societies, is that the foundation, when we start to look at societies, compare societies one to another, is that cowardice is never a virtue in any society. is that cheating on your fellow human being is never virtuous in any society. And so you begin to see how that everywhere we're looking to ground our moral principles comes up short. Now, here's the argument. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Now, moral values and duties are not based on the individual, society, science, evolution, or some platitude. I think I've already demonstrated that earlier on in this video. So objective moral values and duties do exist, is that we're confident of that. Even the moral relativist expects to be treated fairly. Therefore, God exists. But here is the complaint that a lot of folks like to interject at this particular time, and that it's called the urethro dilemma. And that's just simply this. Is morality based on God's commands? If so, then is murder wrong because God prohibits it? What if God commanded you to murder? Then would it be okay? And you can see where this is going. Well, are God's commands based on morality then? Does God permit murder because it's wrong? And so we have this apparent dilemma here, but there's actually a third way to this. And so here's the apparent dilemma, that if God permits or prohibits something because it's wrong, then there's a standard that's greater than God. So what's the solution? Well, like I said, there's a third way to this that is not manifest, is not evident in that dilemma. And here's this, is that morality simply springs from God's unchanging nature. God only commands what is consistent with his nature. God is the basis of objective moral values and duties, and to him we all must give an account. We read in 2 Corinthians 5:10, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad." And so I think it's pretty evident as we begin to think a little bit about these things that there is a basis for morality that transcends the individual, society, these various platitudes that people will like to or promote, or science, that there's something that is much deeper, much more consistent across cultures. And I believe that you can make a strong case that the basis for morality is God's nature himself. And that's why I'm a Christian. One of the reasons, like I say, it's a cumulative case for me. Relativism, however, moral relativism, is extremely popular in our culture today. However, more and more as people gravitate towards progressivism, they have their absolutes that you have to subscribe to in order for you to be a good person. And they're always in the business of defining to you what those absolutes are. But I like this quote by Peter Kreeft, and he says this. He says, "Moral relativism has a reputation for being compassionate, caring, and humane, but it is an extremely useful philosophy for tyrants." And really, it's interesting to me, if you really begin to kind of trace some of this, is that the history of modern progressivism has its roots. It came from moral relativism. And once that there was a erosion of confidence in God being the source of moral values and duties, well, then all of a sudden that this new this new moral absolutes have been kind of snuck into the system through modern philosophies. And so it's just something to think about. I wanted to share that with you here today, and share with you some of the reasons why I'm a Christian. And I'll circle back to some of these or some additional reasons in upcoming broadcasts. And so that's it for now. Thanks for watching.